chart out a path, then it is very easy for you to follow that. Then you just have to fill in the details. So most importantly, you make a structure, you make a map, you make a table of contents of your article. I know article is very brief. It need not be more than 2,500, 3,000 words in my view. And it need not be very short also. It should be informative. Nothing in the article should be informal. It should be crisp, brief, to the point, and accurate information, and unique content, of course, original content. Now, how do you improve your writing skills? When you start reading judgments of the Supreme Court, so I will tell you how I improved writing. I had issues with the language. I was not familiar with English language in the initial years of my college. I could not speak in English properly. I had a stage fear. So I faced a lot of difficulties during college days. What I did, I started reading judgments of Justice Krishna Iyer, whom I consider as my role model. And when I started reading his judgments, I started falling into the romance of law. And I started reading more and more. So the idea is you start by reading good judgments that are quality judgments, which would eventually increase your interest in the law. There are judgments that I can recommend you, of course, but that is something which we leave for another day. But once you start reading how the judges beautifully draft the judgments, what kind of language they use, the phraseology, the legal lexicon that they use, then you will eventually start using these words in your common parlance, in your daily usage of words. And the terminology that you will be using in your articles will eventually be carried forward from there, from these judgments. So I used to take out good sentences, good phrases, good words from those judgments, and I used to note them down for my own record. So once you start reading the judge's mind, and when you start reading their judgments, which they have written beautifully after years of experience and expertise, now when you are writing on a particular article and you've read 10 judgments on it, so for instance, if you are writing about bail application or just law of bail in India, so you can read 3-4 recent judgments on bail, and I can assure you that after reading those 4 judgments, you will without even looking at anything, you will be able to write one page. So when you prepare one draft, then you start proofreading it and start making corrections. Because the more you read it, the more you proofread your own work, you will be able to find flaws, find errors, and you will keep beautifying it, make it better. Every time you read it, you will think of restructuring it, putting first topic up and then the other topic in the middle. So it has to go like a story in a flow that the person who reads it should enjoy reading it. And most importantly, when you're writing an article, you have to make sure that the beginning of that article needs to be attractive. Because if it isn't attractive, because a person makes up his mind in the first few minutes that whether I have to read the full article or not. So if you read the first 2 lines and you find it interesting, and the heading has to be very catchy, it should not be something very normal which a person reads day and night. So you have to apply your mind, you have to think like a reader, that what the reader would want to see. And it has to be catchy, it has to be attractive, and the beginning has to be very beautiful, because if in the beginning you are able to generate the interest of the reader, then he'll read the full article for sure. So that's very briefly, I can only tell you these things. But what I'm telling you is that you need to read a lot before you write on any topic. But idea is to start writing. And if you can't get your articles published, you start writing on LinkedIn, you start writing on your Facebook. Write on proper issues. Do not write on irrelevant issues. Try to make a mark by putting forth your opinion, by exercising your rights through channels of effective communication. Use social media to the best of your ability and to the best interest of the people. So start writing on small issues. First, you start writing small posts, then eventually this habit will grow. This is not something which will happen overnight, and you will take some time, but I'm sure you'll improve with time. Mr. Chhatran.
Yeah, Tarek, thank you for giving a bird eye view of how to write about and go about it. Though it was not a topic which was to be discussed yet. Once I read your article yesterday, I felt that every lawyer, maybe he's not a writer, but at least while he drafts, he should know what are the nitty-gritties of writing. So that was kind enough of you all to give the brief way of writing it. Let's go to the topic. And again, I would request everybody not to unmute themselves. Any question should be posted in the chat box. Tariq, right over to you.
Yeah. So like I said, I don't know how many of you are practicing arbitration in Chandigarh. I've been to Chandigarh. I've had the privilege of appearing before the Chandigarh High Court a couple of occasions. And I think it is the arbitration culture is developing pretty fast. And I'm doing some arbitrations there in Chandigarh. What I'm going to discuss today, I'm going to take you to the first step. And before that, if you want me to give you a brief history of arbitration in India, I'll be more than happy to do so.
Tariq, just believe that majority of them are young lawyers who are just trying to take over the wings. So you just believe, even if the persons of slightly who are in the age of 40, 50 or 60, they are also not into the nitty-gritties of this thing. Just believe that's a formal, brief, introductory. We will take you on. I've read that article of yours wherein you have written 25 judgments, bird eye view, and then 40. On some other day, we would again request you to come on the board, help them. Firstly, just like what you have given on the Facebook, that talk of yours where you give the brief discussion about the sections, number one. And number two, just 4 or 5 latest judgments. Because keeping in view the time constraint, I don't think we will be able to do much. Thank you.
Problem. No problem. So I like to give you a brief background in a minute. Initially, the arbitration was not, there was not a proper act in the country. Arbitration was there in CPC second schedule. Thereafter, in 1940, an arbitration act was formed under which the arbitrations were being conducted for the longest time. Then came the 1996 Act, which we are following today also. And then in 2015, there was an amendment to the Arbitration Act, and the recent one was in 2019. Now I'll start from the important provisions. So how do you get into an arbitration? Why do you go for an arbitration? How does it all start? Like when you enter into a contract with another party, all you need to do is you need to incorporate a dispute resolution clause in that agreement if you want your disputes to be resolved by arbitration. Generally, what we see that if there is a dispute between two parties, we go to the civil court for recovery of money and for other things, for resolution of our disputes. However, when the intention of two parties is that if disputes arise tomorrow, we should not go to the court and we should get our disputes resolved by arbitration, then the only thing that we need to do is we need to put an arbitration clause in that agreement. Arbitration clause, like any other clause, because a contract may have many clauses like indemnification clause, termination clause, payment clause. Similarly, there's a clause called dispute resolution clause, which is the arbitration clause. In that clause, you will define that tomorrow if disputes arise between parties, any dispute arising out of or in relation to the agreement shall be resolved by arbitration, to be resolved by an arbitrator, to be mutually appointed by the parties, and the law applicable to the arbitration shall be Indian Arbitration Act 1996. So, and the language of the arbitration shall be English. This is like the standard form of arbitration clause. Basically, parties give their intention that we want to settle our disputes by arbitration if tomorrow something happens and we don't want to go to the courts. Why they don't want to go to the courts? They do not want to go to the courts because in courts it may take years and years. Whereas in arbitration, if you see section 29A of the amended act, it says that arbitration needs to be finished within 1 year's time. After the amendment of 2019, now the law is that within 6 months, the pleadings have to be completed. And after the completion of pleadings, within 1 year's time, the award has to come. So in a way, 18 months is the time now for completing an arbitration. That's why people prefer going for arbitration and they do not like going to the courts in case of any dispute arises. The second beauty about arbitration is that it is flexible. The technicalities of CPC and evidence, the strict rules do not apply. Nowadays, you will agree with me, and Mr. Chatrat will also agree with me, that in courts, there are a lot of technicalities. Getting a matter listed before the court becomes difficult sometimes, due to which we face a lot of issues, and sometimes the prolongation of the matter, dates are given, for some reason adjournments are being sought, and the whole day you have to wait, the clients have to wait in the court. So it becomes very inconvenient. Therefore, an arbitration is a private setting wherein you can choose a different venue. Venue can be Taj Mansingh, it can be Hyatt, it can be Chandigarh Arbitration Center. Venue can be any place where you want to conduct arbitration. It is as per the convenience of the parties. So that is the beauty about the arbitration. You are sitting, you are comfortable, you don't have to wear black and white necessarily. You can have tea while arbitration is going on. You are sitting, you're not standing, you're not wearing a band. All those formalities are not there in arbitration. So arbitration, in a way, is an alternative dispute resolution. Everything else is same, but it is better because it is flexible. Parties have more role to play than the court. Parties have a say in it. It is called party autonomy, which means freedom of parties. Parties can agree on the procedure for resolving the disputes. And at the end of the day, it is quick, it is expeditious, because at the end of the day, parties want that the dispute should be resolved at the earliest, and it should not take years and years. Now, if you read section 19 of the Arbitration and Conciliation Act, that is the provision which says that strict rules of evidence and CPC, Evidence Act and CPC, will not apply to arbitration proceedings. Only the principles behind evidence and CPC will apply. Meaning thereby that arbitration is very flexible, and that's one aspect why youngsters should encourage themselves to participate and practice arbitration law. Because many times what happens is that when you are doing a matter in a trial court, you see that any lawyer who's a seasoned lawyer, who's a pro in CPC or evidence, will be able to win an argument over you and will have an upper edge because of his vast knowledge of CPC and evidence. Whereas a young lawyer or a young practitioner may not be able to have the command over the Civil Procedure Code or Evidence Act. However, in arbitration, like I said, that because the CPC and evidence are not strictly applicable, because the procedure is very simple and very flexible, there are no formats as such for filing any statement of claim or any pleadings. So it's very easy, and it is an opportunity for youngsters to make a mark easily in comparison to the civil courts, where you need to know and master the skills of CPC and evidence also. Now, if you want to know when you have to draft an arbitration clause, what is a valid arbitration clause? I will not go into the details. I have explained you how a format looks like, where you define what kind of disputes will be covered, what law will govern the arbitration which is going to be conducted, who will be the arbitrator. Arbitrator is the judge who will decide the matter eventually. Now, Section 7 in the Arbitration Act, it talks about what is a valid arbitration clause. Now, assuming that there was an arbitration clause in an agreement, assuming that me and Mr. Chhatrat, we have entered into a contract, and tomorrow disputes arise, as a lawyer, if you come across a case like that, the first thing that you will see is that whether in my contract with Mr. Chatrat, is there an arbitration clause at all or not? Now, if you see there is an arbitration clause, then that means you cannot go to the civil courts. You will not file a case before civil courts in Chandigarh, etc. No, you cannot. You need to invoke arbitration. And how will you invoke arbitration? That's an interesting question. Now, this takes us back to the procedure which has been prescribed in the arbitration clause. Now, as per the Act, when does an arbitration commence? When does it start? So Section 21 of the Arbitration and Conciliation Act, it says that when you send a notice invoking arbitration, now what is a notice invoking arbitration? Basically, notice invoking arbitration is just like a legal notice, but it is called a notice invoking arbitration, wherein you will invoke that clause of the agreement, which is the arbitration clause. And if Mr. Chatrat is your client and he says he has problems with me, I have not given him his money, he wants to recover his money, he has certain claims against me. And if he's your client, then as a lawyer, you will be sending a notice invoking arbitration to me saying that, look, in the agreement that you entered with my client, there was an arbitration clause, which is clause so and so. And as per the clause, the arbitrator was to be mutually decided by both of us. I have a question from Niharika. Can one invoke arbitration agreement even when the agreement is bereft of an arbitration clause? Niharika, the thing is that there has to be an arbitration clause. If
Tarek,
there is, yes.
Could you repeat the question slightly slowly, because you would have been able to read it, but rest of them would not have read it. So
Okay.
I would just request you that read the question slowly and then you can answer.
Okay,
Sorry
perfect.
to bother you. Thank you.
No problem. No problem. So Niharika has asked me. I'll just read it quickly for you. Just 1 second. I need to go back to the chat. Niharika has asked me a question. Can one invoke arbitration?
I can read the question for you.
Yeah.
Can one invoke arbitration qua an agreement even when the agreement is bereft of an arbitration clause?
So like I said, Niharika, that the prerequisite for invoking an arbitration is that there must be an agreement and there must be an arbitration clause in that agreement. If the agreement is bereft of an arbitration clause, then there is nothing to be invoked unless parties later on decide that, look, instead of going to the civil courts, let us do arbitration. So even if the agreement was bereft of an arbitration clause, but subsequently parties agree to have arbitration, then only in that scenario you can have arbitration. Otherwise, it is mandatory that there needs to be an arbitration clause so that you can invoke that clause and refer your disputes to the arbitrator. That's the prerequisite. Moving on, if a notice invoking arbitration is being sent by you on behalf of your client, that is the first step that you do to invoke arbitration and to start arbitration proceedings. So that is the title which has been given under section 21, which is commencement of arbitral proceedings. So that is the language, which means that once you send that notice on behalf of Mr. Chatrat, your client, to me, and the date on which I received that notice which you have sent, that is the date on which the arbitral proceedings are set to be commenced. So always remember, if someone asks you, when does an arbitral proceeding start? The answer to that question is when one party sends the arbitration notice and the other party receives it. So the date of the receipt is the date on which the arbitral proceedings commence. Now moving on. So assuming that after receiving the notice, I go to my lawyer and I say, look, a notice has come from the other party. They want to invoke arbitration and they want me to agree to the name which they have suggested. So assuming that Mr. Chatrat's lawyer said that we want to appoint Niharika as the arbitrator in the matter. Now, of course, I will not agree to that name because I am saying, no, I know this person, Niharika, whoever she is, she must be known to Mr. Chatrat and thus she will be biased. Therefore, I will say that in the reply, I will deny all the claims of Mr. Chatrat. I will say, no, that is not correct. I have not breached the contract. You are not entitled to any payments. And thus I will say, I do not agree to the name which you have suggested. And I will propose another name of an arbitrator. Now, because parties will be at a disagreement in respect of who is going to be the arbitrator for the matter, because we both will not agree on the common name, which is generally the case, then what do we do? How do we get an arbitrator appointed? Because for an arbitration to go on, it is relevant that there has to be a judge who is called the arbitrator. So unless the arbitrator is in place, who will conduct the proceedings? Before whom will we appear? So first step is then, after sending the notice, to get an arbitrator appointed. Now getting an arbitrator appointed is because parties have not agreed on a common name. Now Mr. Chatrat's lawyer will now file an application before the court, which is an application under section 11.5 and 11.6. When two parties are at a disagreement in respect of the name of the arbitrator, then the court will appoint the arbitrator, and you will file an application under section 11 before the High Court, because only High Court will have the jurisdiction and the lower courts will not have the jurisdiction to appoint an arbitrator in any matter. Always remember. Mr. Bhupinder has a question. If the clause says that arbitrator will be appointed by one party only, let me read the full question. Just 1 second.
I can read for you.
Can you read it?
Yeah. Whenever the question is there, I can read for you.
Yeah.
You can go ahead with that. If the clause says that the arbitrator will be appointed by a party one only, in that case, second party has a right to raise objections qua the appointment of the said arbitrator or not.
That's an excellent question. This was a controversy going on for a very long time because party autonomy, like I said, freedom of parties to agree on a name. Earlier, what used to happen, one party would retain the right to appoint an arbitrator. And whenever disputes would arise, they would appoint their own person as the arbitrator. Now, because of this, many times the arbitrator was biased. So recently, there has been a great development in the law. There is a judgment of Justice Indu Malhotra and Justice UU Lalit. It was delivered on 26th of November 2019. The name of the judgment is Perkins Eastman case. Yes, you're right. Somebody has, Ifat Siddiqui has in fact written the name. Thank you. And in Perkins, this judgment has been authored by Justice UU Lalit. Now what the court has said, a party which is interested in the subject matter of dispute must not appoint an arbitrator. Therefore, the question which you have asked, now there is an end to this controversy. Now, if you are a related party or if you are an interested party, you cannot appoint a sole arbitrator, which means that there will be no question of me objecting because you cannot. Even otherwise, in the amended act of 2015, there is a schedule 5 and schedule 7. Schedule 7 lays down certain grounds which make an arbitrator ineligible to be appointed. For instance, if Mr. Chatrat is in a dispute with me, then he cannot appoint his employee, his brother, his sister, his relative, his friend as an arbitrator. So all of that has been taken care of, especially after the Perkins Eastman case. Now unilateral appointments are not permissible. So there will be no question of me objecting to your appointment. You cannot appoint. That is the issue. Okay,
Tarek, I just want, though there is one question by Sayed, I will come to that, but I just wanted, taking further from Perkins Eastman case, one question which is boggling in the minds of all the lawyers and arbitrators is as to whether it will apply retrospectively, that is meaning thereby the proceedings where it was going on. Let's assume the award has come or we are in the objection stage or it's in the High Court. What will be the effect of the Perkins Eastman's case?
Excellent question, sir. There was a recent case by Delhi High Court because in India, only Delhi High Court has had the opportunity to give the applicability of the judgment of Perkins Eastman. In Justice Jyoti Singh, in a very recent case from Delhi High Court, in case of Podyatur Cable, I don't have the citation right now. You can Google it. You'll easily find it.
She had said, on the live law.
Yeah, it's Podyatur Cable. Somebody can just, in the meantime, Kushika or anybody can type it on Google and share the citation here. In that case, what Justice Jyoti Singh said, she said that this will be applicable even to those arbitration which had commenced earlier than the date of the pronouncement of Perkins Eastman, but under the 2015 amendment, meaning thereby that if an arbitration had commenced after 23rd October 2015, then it will be covered by this decision. So if a unilateral arbitrator was appointed in those matters, then he can be removed by using this judgment. So in a way, Perkins Eastman has been retrospectively applied by the Delhi High Court, which means that now these awards can also be challenged on the ground that the appointment was unilateral, only one party had appointed, and even at the stage of execution, perhaps such an objection can be raised.
Taking cue from what you have said and from the Delhi High Court judgment, my personal belief is that once in the judgment of Perkins also, it happened like this. So probably there shouldn't be any gray area for that. The next question from Sayed is, Tarek, this is for you. What if a party provides a list of proposed arbitrators to the other party? I mean this without the other party playing any role in the appointment. It just has to select a role, sole arbitrator amongst the provided list. It will be very beneficial if you may cite a case along with it.
Just one second. Whose question? What the party provides a list of proposed arbitrators to the other party?
This question is by Syed.
Okay, this is without the other party playing any role in the appointment. It just has to select a sole arbitrator among the provided list. Okay, so I think what Syed is trying to portray is that if me and Mr. Chatrat, we are in an arbitration, and if Mr. Chatrat is not appointing an arbitrator, but he's sharing few names with me, and he's asking me to select any one of them. Maybe this is the question, isn't it, Mr. Chatrat?
I can ask Syed to come on the board. He can put the question right in the right perspective.
Yes.
Syed, if you are on the board, you can just come on. You can unmute yourself and ask the question in whichever language you are comfortable.
Oh, he said that is correct. He said that is correct. I read his.
Then it's fine. Then you can answer that.
So this is absolutely permissible. Thanks, Kushika. Kushika has shared the citation of Prodyatur Cable TV matter, so you can take out from that. So this issue appeared in the case of Voicetel Pine judgment, which was prior to TRF. In Voicetel Pine matter, there was a panel of arbitrators maintained by DMRC. Now DMRC had a panel which had, I am forgetting the name of the judge, but it was said that a panel of 31 people would be proper, that you maintain a broad panel, you don't appoint one person, and you suggest those names to the other side. So the other side can select name from there. That will be considered to be fair, and that is absolutely permissible. So if there is a dispute between me and Mr. Chatrat, and Mr. Chatrat, instead of appointing one person as the arbitrator, he says, Tariq, I have maintained a panel of arbitrators, which is a broad panel, and you please select one person from that as the arbitrator, then this is permissible. There is no bar on the law. This is absolutely valid. This was recently followed in one Northern Railway, some judgment, I'm forgetting the name, of Justice Bhanumati, wherein she has said this is a perfectly valid practice. There is nothing wrong with it because you are getting options to choose from. He's not imposing one person on you. And because the only recommendation that the Supreme Court has given in the previous judgments in DMRC case in Voicetel Pine, that the panel that you are maintaining must be broad. Because initially when the 4 names were sent, the court said, no, 4 is a less number. You need to make it broader. So when the court realized it is a 31 names, then court said, yes, it is fine. Now the other party will not be at any prejudice and they can shortlist and select one name. So that's how panel of arbitrators is absolutely legal and it is permissible.
Probably the judgment is Central Organization for Railways versus Messrs. ECI SPIC.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. And Jitendra Bhatta is asking whether retired employee can be appointed as an arbitrator or not.
Absolutely.
For that matter, I go a step further. Can anybody beyond the retired employee can also be appointed or not? Just like in NHI cases, you would have seen that the commissioners, IAS officers, etc., are being appointed.
If you see the panel of arbitrators, if it has names of the employees who had worked with you long back, then that is permissible in the panel. And you may want to see Schedule 5 and Schedule 7. See, the test is very simple, which will clarify all your doubts. Just open Schedule 7 of the Arbitration Act, which was introduced on 23rd October 2015.
Just a minute. Can somebody post the Schedule 7 on the group? Javeer or if Sumit is on the board, he can do that.
It's in the Arbitration Act also.
No, I'm saying somebody can post it also there. Meanwhile, one question is from Ifat Siddiqui. What is the time limit of objection? Objection is over.
Of the objection to the arbitral award? Challenge to the award? Or the...
Ifat, could you just clarify as to what time limit you are asking for?
Are you asking about 34 objections or objection to the arbitrator? Appointment of the arbitrator? I'll clarify both. So if it's about the objection to the appointment of the arbitrator, so the moment you receive a name, you of course, obviously immediately object. And if you can't do it by then before filing of the statement of defense, and even if you can't do then whenever you get to know about those circumstances, if you read the language of section 12 and 13, section 12 is the provision which talks about the grounds for challenge to the arbitrator. So if you want to challenge an arbitrator, there are only two grounds available to you. Firstly, that he does not possess the qualification which the parties had agreed. And secondly, if there are circumstances which give justifiable doubts as to his independence and impartiality. Now, all these issues that we are discussing would fall in the second one, that circumstances which give rise to his, justifiable grounds to his impartiality and independence. Now, the Schedule 7, which I was referring to, and the question which was asked to me, Schedule 5 and Schedule 7 are both under Section 12. Now, Schedule 7, just open Schedule 7, and if you can see, there are certain...
Mr. Batta, you have posted that. Kindly make it in the correct form. Jitender, post that second schedule in the right perspective.
Sir, do you want me to share the 7th schedule? I have it on my screen.
Yeah, share it. Tariq, we want the second schedule.
7th.
Yeah.
I got it, sir. I got it on my screen.
Yeah, we just posted.
I can't share the screen, but I think somebody else has already.
Jitender, either you make it correct or let JV do it. Yeah, Tariq, it's on the board.
Yeah. So there are two schedules. If you can see Schedule 7, it talks about the relationship of the arbitrator with the parties. Now, the relationships which you are giving me in the illustration, if he's a retired employee, if he's a friend, if he's a family friend, if he is interested in the subject matter. So the test is simple. There may be many other situations also. All you need to do is you open Schedule 7. There are certain relationships which have been mentioned. If you see that the relationship in your case of the arbitrator is falling in any of the grounds mentioned in Schedule 7, then the arbitrator becomes ineligible. You can challenge him immediately saying that you are ineligible to be appointed. However, there is another schedule, which is Schedule 5. If the arbitrator's relationship is falling in Schedule 5, then he does not become ineligible, but that would give justifiable doubts as to his independence and impartiality. And you can, of course, challenge the appointment of the arbitrator on those grounds also, but he would not become ineligible to be appointed if he's falling in Schedule 5. That's the difference between Schedule 5 and Schedule 7. Now, moving on. So I think there were some other questions also, Mr. Chatrat, if you want me to.
Question is, in case of arbitration between two parties, should the party suggest 10-15 names or 3-4 questions are sufficient? Probably this has been answered, but still you can just...
I'll just tell you, in Voice to Pine judgment, they said that 4 is less number, 31 is a better number. Fixed number has not been defined so far in any judgment. What is right, what is wrong, but the recent judgment which Mr. Chatrat just shared, in that the court said 4 is also fine. So that guideline has not been given so far, but the courts have always encouraged a broader number so that the party can choose from it.
And now Devika Raj asks, cases where arbitrators are appointed by provision of the statute, like that in the arbitration of compensation disputes between NHA and landlord, are those provisions impacted by the Parkinson's judgment?
See, the simple thing is that if an arbitrator has been appointed under any statute, at the end of the day, the arbitration is going to be conducted under the Arbitration Act. Even though there are separate statutes, but they cannot override the arbitration. So appointment of any arbitrator under any statute will be governed by the Act, and the Perkins judgment will be applicable on all those matters wherever an arbitration is taking place, irrespective under what provision it is taking place or whether the appointment is under some special enactment or not.
Now, Ifat Siddiqui has clarified his question in the chat. He says, my question was that can we challenge an award in the light of Parkinson's case if the time limit of challenge is over, since it is retrospective, since it is retrospective till 2015.
No, if you read section 34.3, the time period for challenging an award is 3 months plus 1 month, which is the discretion of the court, but not thereafter. So if you are within 120 days, then you have a chance. But if the period of 4 months is over, then you cannot challenge it no matter what, because the court does not have the discretion.
Now, one question which is boggling within the minds of all of us is another, like what is invariably happening. You would have seen that in NHI cases, again, that provision of section 34 and all come, then the first remedy as such would be challenging in an appeal. But invariably, once the limitation of 120 days is over, large number of people have started invoking the petition under 227, and the courts are, at least in the Punjab and Haryana High Court, taking irrespective of the fact that there is a special statute, number one. Number two, irrespective of the fact that there is a limitation, they are still going ahead with that. What would be the fate of those cases? Can it be challenged? And what would be the case law as to once there is a specific remedy according to that, and still they are going about it and entertaining under the writ jurisdiction, saying that it has a wider scope?
See, this is a practice in many high courts, wherein a party files a writ petition just to prolong the proceedings. So I cannot really comment on that because judges are entertaining, nobody can stop them. The powers are extraordinary. However, the Supreme Court has laid down the law on the point. There is a judgment by Justice Nariman, and there's another judgment, I'm forgetting the name, but it was recently cited by the division bench of Delhi High Court in a case called Haji Mastan Banda, where the issue was very major, that after 4 months, the allegation which has been put forth by one side is the award was obtained by fraud and corruption. The allegations were against the arbitrator, that the arbitrator had merely taken the award from the counsel of one side and typed it and kept it in the same form on soft copy, the same was shared. So the allegations were very, very grave, but the court said no, the moment 4 months is over, no matter what happens, you cannot, because the usage of words but not thereafter in 34.3 makes it clear that the intention of the legislature is that not after the period of 4 months is over, you cannot entertain with an award. And the Supreme Court has clarified. So even if Punjab and Haryana High Court or any other High Court is entertaining, you need to go and simply show that Supreme Court judgment. I will share that name. I need some time. I don't have it.
Meanwhile, anybody who is able to search it, they can post it on the chat box.
Yes, please. It's a very famous 4 months ago, I think.
Yeah.
Very, very.
Because one of the judgments which is often referred to, qua limitation, etc. And why people take cue is, if you remember Justice Kuldeep Singh's judgment, which said SP Changalavaraya Naidu versus Jagannath, which said that fraud vitiates everything. So some of the judges take cue from that, and insofar as in NHI cases is concerned, they sometimes say it's a beneficial legislation. Therefore, the rigors of the special act will not fritter down the powers given under 227 and 226.
That's the thing that has been debated. But Supreme Court, if you read the judgment in Simplex Infrastructure by Supreme Court, one judgment I can tell you right now, Simplex Infrastructure. In that judgment,
any of the friends can just post these judgments on the group so that everybody could be learning meanwhile when we are having this meeting itself. Now the next question is, Tariq.
I'll just tell you what Simplex said. Simplex Infrastructure, Supreme Court said that the period prescribed in 34.3, that is 3 months plus 1 month, 4 months, must be mandatorily complied with. The Supreme Court has simple, clear words said so. So if tomorrow somebody says NHAI or beneficial or a special legislation, it is all not going to stand or hold water, because the Supreme Court has clarified that 34.3 will be mandatorily complied with. That's, yeah, somebody has shared, Vinita Tiwari has shared. Thank you. So this talks about 34.3. There are other judgments. I would request you all to read my article on the latest judgment, which Mr. Chatrat, of course, can share. In all these articles, all these aspects are covered. You will be able to find, and if any issues you are facing in any of your matter, you can simply show to the Honorable Judge the judgments of the Supreme Court. I don't think beyond that anything else we can do. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, next question poses by Tarun Aliwadi. If the agreement provides that the arbitrator will be an employee or an MD of one party, can the other party still challenge such appointment?
Yes, TRF judgment is the relevant judgment, and the managing director cannot be the appointing authority, and that's what Perkins has clarified. now further. TRF has been clarified further by Perkins Eastman. So now no more. MD or MD cannot be the appointing authority also.
Next question is by Rajanji Jora, whether the party receiving such list of wider panel is bound to select from the wider panel or can reject it or move the court for appointment.
No, that's what happened. The party had moved in Worcester Pine judgment in that railway matter, both these matters. The court said, no, you select from the broader panel. It is absolutely fair. You have options and it is a fair methodology, mechanism.
And
So
Kushika has been kind enough to post that judgment from our bench.
Kushika has been following my webinars and I know her for long. She's been very helpful. Yes.
So one good person brings along the other persons.
Yeah.
That's the beauty. So probably no other question you can move, or just as we had discussed, as per the format of our group, we will have a 10-minute break. Anybody who wants to go for a tea or a restroom, then right now the time is, by my watch is 11:52. So we catch back by 12:05. So I would request everybody to join back by, start connecting by 12:03, so that we don't miss. It's a good luck for everybody that Tarek has joined us. So we join at 12:05, but start connecting by 12:02 or 12:03. Yeah, thank you.
Number of arbitrators, but it should not be an even number. The number always has to be an odd number. Ordinarily, it is a sole arbitrator, but in cases where the stakes are very high, then the number of arbitrators is 3. So yeah.
2-3 more questions can be.
Yeah.
Yeah. One Manik Makkad has posed a question referring to Section 8 of the Arbitration and Conciliation Act 1996, wherein a judicial authority is required to refer the matter to the arbitration, wherein a clause exists as to arbitration if a party to the suit applies and not later than the date of submitting his first statement. Question. Yeah. Where the pleading as to the existence of the arbitration clause in the agreement was mentioned in the preliminary objections in the written statement, but not brought in the notice of the court while framing issues, and due to this negligence, the civil suit proceeded further. In such a case, can any application be moved on a later stage to refer to the matter to the arbitration?
See, ordinarily, a person has to be diligent. I haven't come across a case of this kind, but it is as per the rules of proceeding. Ordinarily, a court should not proceed. But in Arbitration Act, there is a provision. If you see Section 4 or Section 5, it is waiver of right to object. So once a party agrees to a procedure and does not object, does not raise any objection in respect of that, then it is considered that that party has accepted that norm, that procedure. And later on, it is stopped from raising such an objection. So that is very crucial and very critical, that if you do not act diligent at the right time, and if it was in your knowledge and you did not raise that objection, in a way, the courts have generally treated this as an estoppel, as a waiver of right to object. So that completely depends from case to case. Basically, courts may have different opinion. But if I were to argue, I would say that estoppel and waiver will operate in this question.
The next question posed is by Kushika Sethia. Sir, what if we mention in an arbitration clause the place of arbitration will be Delhi? Does this imply seat and venue will be different? I take a step further. Tarek, could you explain the difference between the seat and the venue also?
Kushika, under the Indian Arbitration Act, there is no seat which is defined. The place has been defined under Section 20. And in many cases, in domestic arbitrations, 21 and 22, if you see, that parties are free to agree on a place. Whereas 23 says that arbitrator can decide any venue for conducting hearings, cross-examination, etc., etc. Seat is nowhere defined. However, seats and venue, these are two different things, different concepts. What Mr. Vikas Chitrat asked me just now, what is the difference between the two? The difference is very simple. A place may be a convenient place for conducting an arbitration. It can be merely a venue where two parties are meeting to conduct arbitration. It can be a meeting point. Sometimes venue can be Bombay, sometimes venue can be Delhi. Whereas the seat is the juridical seat, which has the exclusive jurisdiction of the arbitration. For instance, if the seat of arbitration is Delhi, then courts alone in Delhi shall have jurisdiction. Because the moment you define a seat in a matter in an arbitration clause, you are giving the courts of that seat exclusive jurisdiction to deal with any kind of matter pertaining to that arbitration proceeding, as the seat is the epicenter of an arbitration. However, in recent judgments, the most recent being BGS SGS Soma versus NHPC by Justice Rohinton Nariman, which is of 12th December 2019, wherein it has been clarified that Hardy and Antrix Devas are the incorrect position of law because they do not follow Balco judgment correctly and do not apply the Rogers Oshua test properly. What has been said is that venue, in the absence, if the seat is not defined, then the place of arbitration will be treated as the seat of arbitration unless there is something significant which suggests otherwise. The name of the case, Ifat, is BGS SGS Soma versus NHPC. Kushika, can you please share the citation?
The next question, meanwhile, you can answer.
Yeah.
Geeta has asked, can an expert be appointed along with the arbitrator if the matter is technical and requires an expert opinion?
Absolutely. There is a provision in the Arbitration Act. I am not sure if it's 25, 26, or 27, 25 or 26 maybe, that the arbitrator for conducting arbitration. So there are two kinds of expert. One is the party appointed expert.
26.
26. Thank you. I don't have the Bear Act with me, so I'm sorry.
I have with me.
So
Mr.
the
P.P. Singh is himself an expert.
Definitely.
He's from FCI. He's been in the MD. So he's always been the helm of the arbitration.
pleasure to
We
have
look
you.
upon him.
We are fortunate.
Now, Garima asks, sir, is there any difference between a seat of arbitration and the governing law? For example, what if an arbitration clause states the seat of arbitration to be one of country and governing law of another country? Meanwhile, Khushika has been kind enough to post the judgment of SGS Soma versus NHPC. Khushika, well appreciated.
My request to everybody who has any doubts in respect of seat and venue, please read this judgment, BGS SGS Soma. It has discussed the law on seat and venue at length, and I think all your doubts in relation to the seat and venue will be cleared the moment you finish reading this judgment. And the question which has been asked is, I'll tell you simply, Garima has asked this question. See, the seat, it's very simple. The law as it stands today is that the moment you define a seat of arbitration in an arbitration clause, that seat alone shall have exclusive jurisdiction of the arbitration, meaning thereby that all the applications which are to be filed in the court in relation to that arbitration proceedings will be filed in the court of the seat. There was a recent case where Justice Bhanumati on 5th March, in the case of, the name of the case is Mankatsu. I don't know the full name, you can check it. I think that also can be shared by Kushika. So in the case of Mankatsu, this was held that Hong Kong was the seat of arbitration and the section 11 for appointment of arbitrator was filed in Delhi. The Supreme Court said that no, because the seat was Hong Kong, it can only be filed in Hong Kong and not in Delhi. That was the long and short of it. Okay, there was another question also, if I'm not wrong, sir.
Yes, Swati Batra has posed a question. Kindly explain two types of experts.
Okay, so there are two kinds of experts in any arbitration. One is party appointed expert and the other is the expert appointed by the tribunal. So when parties appoint the expert, we call it independent experts, but the parties pay these experts and the experts then prepare a report and then they give their affidavits and then they are cross-examined. These are called expert witnesses. They're just like any other, but they do not give testimony on facts. They can give expertise on delay, for instance, or quantum. So that is the area of expertise. But in other scenario, the arbitrator himself appoints an expert. Okay, Kushika has shared that judgment, by the way. Thanks, Kushika.
I was thinking that Kushika could also play KBC, fastest finger first.
Yeah, I think so too. You know, she is kind and diligent. Yeah.
Yeah. Bhupinder Gupta has asked if the arbitration clause provides for a place of arbitration which is conveniently approachable to one party and difficult for another, whether objection can be raised by the other party.
If you read section 20, okay, I'll first finish the previous question. The other type of expert was the tribunal appointed expert, wherein the tribunal, if it finds that there are certain issues on which the arbitrator may not have knowledge, for instance, if it involves a huge accountancy issue, the arbitrator may not be an expert and may appoint an audit firm or an accountancy firm to give testimony and assist the tribunal in that matter. Or it can be a maritime issue, delay, quantum, etc., etc. So those are party-appointed experts. Now, coming to the next question regarding the venue, which is not convenient to one party. See, ordinarily, it is agreed first, which is section 20, which says that parties may agree on the place of arbitration. If the place of arbitration says Chandigarh Arbitration Center, for instance, in one of my matters, the clause says that Chandigarh Arbitration Center will be the venue. Now, even if it is inconvenient to me, I cannot object because I've agreed to it. Assuming that there was no agreement, then you read section 23, subclause 3, subsection 3. It says that arbitrator is free to agree on a place if the parties have not agreed. So arbitrator will have to see his convenience. If you can convince him, very well. If you cannot convince him, he's the boss. He gets to decide everything.
Now, 91902. Again, I would request that everybody should post their name rather than the mobile number, etc. It becomes embarrassing to call somebody by like 91902. Sorry for passing certain remarks. I wish to ask how foreign awards are enforceable in India and if the ex-party proceedings can also be initiated while enforcement application of the foreign award is still lying pending in the court.
See, the procedure for enforcement of foreign awards is done under Part 2. And if you see section 48 and 49, they sum up the position of the law on the point. Like the moment there is an arbitration award of a foreign country, which has to be enforced. So ideally it is enforced in a place where the assets of the judgment debtor are located. So if the losing party is an Indian party and the winning party may be a foreign entity, if they want to come to India to enforce this award, because the assets of the Indian entity will be located in India. So you go to that court and you will have to satisfy the court regarding the recognition of that foreign award as a decree of the court. So once the 48 for the objection stage is over.
Tarek, just for a minute, can somebody post that section 48 also on the group so it becomes easy for anybody to understand as such? Javeer or I can ask again Kushika to do the needful. Thanks in advance.
So 48 says when an award, 48 and 49, they are read collectively. So first stage is that when there is a challenge to the award, you have to satisfy to the court that this is proper, this is as per the public policy of the country, and there are certain grounds which have been mentioned. You have to satisfy to the court why this award should be enforced in India, and once the courts in India recognize that foreign award, then it has to be executed as a decree of the court, then it is enforced in accordance with 49.
Sumit Jain has been kind enough to share that. Tarek, you can refer to that section.
I cannot read it because it's pretty small. But I mean, it's okay. Anybody can read it. It's very simple, 48 and 49. These are the provisions which talk about the conditions for enforcement of foreign awards. Okay, I can see something now.
Sumit, can you zoom it further?
No, I can read it. 48 says that conditions of for enforcement of foreign awards. Enforcement of a foreign award may be refused at the request of one party against whom it is invoked, only if the party furnishes to the court proof that. So these are the grounds A, B, C, as you can see, D, E. If you can show any of these, then the enforcement of the foreign award can be refused. So if you are the Indian party and if the enforcement is being sought against you, then you need to see recourse to 48. And you need to show any of these grounds in order to ensure that the award is not enforced in India against you.
Thank you, Sumit. Now, there's another question.
Okay, just one second. Do I proceed with the other provisions, or we are going to have a question? Because I see due to the paucity of time, we might run against the clock because it's already 12:20.
Last two questions, then you can sum up because the act we haven't discussed much. We have more been into a question answer format.
What we can do is let me finish in 10 minutes quickly. Then we can have all these questions.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to, because it's about the overview of the Arbitration Act, and I might have missed a couple of important provisions, which I will briefly cover.
I believe that it has been an interactive session. We can even go beyond that. There's no time schedule. We are not playing T20 match that we cannot have the 21st over.
Okay, then in that case, let's make it an interactive session.
So let it be 12:45. You can speak comfortably. That would make more sense.
Yes.
So do you want me to answer questions first?
No, you can first wrap it off, then we can have the question answer form. Otherwise, we will even go beyond 12:45.
Okay.
We
So-
want next sessions also to continue. They will say that it's not coming to an end. Yeah.
Okay. So if you want, so I was talking about section 11 for appointment of arbitrators. Now, if you go to section 12 and 13, 12, I told you, talks about the grounds for challenge. That if you want to challenge an arbitrator, section 12 is the relevant provision, which I have told you talks about two only provisions, two conditions under which an arbitrator can be challenged. One is that he doesn't possess the qualifications which was agreed to by the parties. And the second is that the arbitrator, there are certain facts which give rise justifiable doubts as to his independence and impartiality. Now the section 13 talks about the procedure for challenge. Similarly, 14-15 of the Arbitration Act talk about substitution of the arbitrator and termination of mandate of the arbitrator. So for instance, if arbitrator becomes ineligible, or perhaps he withdraws from office, or he becomes, for some reasons, the arbitrator is no more, then you will need to get him substituted. So substitution and termination of mandate is under 14-15. If he becomes de jure or de facto ineligible to be able to continue with the proceedings. Now 16 talks about the jurisdiction of the arbitral tribunal. If you feel that there was no arbitration clause in the agreement and the arbitrator has been wrongly appointed and he does not have the jurisdiction to decide the matter, then in that case, what you need to do is you need to file an application under section 16, wherein you will say that this arbitrator does not have the jurisdiction because there is no valid arbitration clause between the parties and arbitration cannot go on. So this is section 16 for you, which talks about the competency of the arbitral tribunal to rule on its own jurisdiction. Now, coming forward, if you go to section 17, so 9 and 17 are very important, very, very important. Section 9 says that, Section 9 talks about interim reliefs. So when there is no tribunal in place, when the arbitrator has not been appointed, and if you need any interim relief, like in civil courts, you need interim measures, you need stay, etc. Similarly, if you need any interim or stay, etc., then you will file an application under section 9 before the court. But if there is an arbitral tribunal in place, then you will file an application under section 17 before the arbitrator. In this regard, the arbitrator will have all the powers of the court under section 17. And if there is a relief which the arbitrator cannot give, only court can give, then you will file a section 9, even if the arbitral tribunal is in place. Now moving on, the other important aspect which I will tell you is section 34. So once the award comes into the picture, and if you are not happy with the award, you can challenge it under section 34 of the Arbitration and Conciliation Act. And what you will have to show is, you will have to show that the arbitral award is against the public policy of the country, which means the central laws or state laws, or that the award was obtained by corruption, fraud, or the award is patently illegal. These are the grounds which you have to satisfy in order to ensure that the award is set aside. What one must remember is that the scope of interference with arbitral awards is very, very narrow. The court does not sit like an appellate court, and the court cannot go into the merits of the case. Only something prima facie has to be shown to the court, that something which shocks the conscience of the court and which makes it evident that the award is not proper, and only then the court will interfere. Because 34 is merely like a review. The courts cannot reappreciate evidence, and if the court feels that the view taken by the arbitrator is a plausible view, then it cannot be interfered with, even if there is any better view than that. So that is 34 for you. Then you talk about execution. So execution is done under section 36. If you want to enforce an award which you have won in an arbitration, the decree holder will have to enforce it in terms of section 36. And as per section 36, now the arbitration award is being dealt as if it is a decree of the court, and it is being enforced like a decree of the court under the CPC, and courts have to follow the principles of section of the CPC while enforcing the award in part 1. The next is section 37, which talks about appeals under the Arbitration Act. So now, interesting thing is that 37 talks about very few provisions which are appealable. So not every order of an arbitrator or the court is appealable. Only those, when you look at the language of section 37, it says that an appeal shall lie from the following and none others, which means only these orders, for instance, section 8, section 9, section 17, section 34, all these provisions are appealable. That is what you have to see, and no other provisions are appealable. Now, this is the long and short of the Arbitration Act, the important relevant provisions I've highlighted. And now perhaps we can have a few questions because I've discussed with you the relevant aspects briefly and quickly.
Yeah.
Now we can take 4 or 5 questions, or I think we can have this.
Ifat Siddiqui has posed a question. Is it possible that an arbitration award is recognized but cannot be enforced?
See, once it is recognized as an award, as a decree of the court, there is nothing unless there are circumstances. It completely depends from facts to fact basis. There may be situation that, for instance, the company does not have the assets here. And I mean, at the end of the day, it completely depends from facts to facts. This is not something, it has to be enforced. There's nothing which would stop it once it is recognized as an award.
Then the next question is by Riddhi and Siddhi Bansal. Power of arbitrator to adapt the contract in an absence of express clause conferring the said power upon the arbitrator. Applicability of Sulmerka's case vis-a-vis Arbitration Act 1996.
Sula America, must be Sula America.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So Sula America talks about something distinct. Sula America talks about the closest connection. And currently, if you see, the Sula America case is not the one which is being followed in respect to, because that is in relation to a seat. That once the seat is not defined, then you look at the closest connection test. But as long as the Indian law is concerned, we are being governed by BGS, SGS, SOMA today. Earlier, we were being governed by Hardy. So I don't see the applicability and delving into that aspect of Sula America case, to be honest. But if your question would be a little specific, I'd be happy to answer, or I can just perhaps read it.
Now Harveet Sehgal says, in case of arbitration for immovable property, can parties decide jurisdiction?
See, I told you that parties are free to agree on a place of jurisdiction. They are happy, they can, as per their own consent. But if the seat is defined, then no matter what has the cause of action, if the seat is agreed upon, that only the courts of that seat will have exclusive jurisdiction, irrespective of everything else.
Now DK Singhal asked, in case of arbitration clause not invoked, what will be the fate of Section 9?
Section 9 can be filed even if the arbitration clause is not invoked. If you look at Section 9(3), it says that once you get a relief in Section 9, within 90 days, you have to invoke the arbitration clause. So which means that even before an arbitration clause is invoked, you can apply to the court for interim release. And within 90 days, you will have to invoke the arbitration.
And Sumit Jain has asked, what procedure is followed for appointment of arbitrator? When Section 8 application is filed, and what is the fate of suit filed? Generally, some courts keep the suit alive.
See, if the courts are keeping the suit alive, Section 8 application is filed for this purpose only. But I don't think there is anything, there is any bar under the jurisdiction of the Section 11 court, because 11 is filed in the High Court. High Court is, of course, Superior Court. And it cannot be that because it is pending, and if in Section 11, all that the court has to see is the valid arbitration clause. That's the limited power of the court under Section 11. So in my view, once you have filed a Section 8, and assuming that the court is going on and on and on, firstly, that order is appealable under 37. That is the appropriate remedy. But parties may take chance and apply for Section 11 and try to convince the court that there is a valid arbitration agreement between the parties.
Tariq, DK Singhal wants to pose the question by unmuting himself.
Yeah,
DK, you can unmute yourself.
Mr. Tariq, in case the arbitration clause is not invoked even in 90 days and Section 9 is still pending, what would be the fate?
No problem. Later on, it can be invoked. The idea is that the arbitration must commence because one party, I'll tell you the practicality. Practicality is that today, if I get a relief against you under Section 9 and the court grants me a stay, and later on, why the legislature wants that I should invoke arbitration in 90 days so that the stay is not operating for a long time against you. Because eventually, mostly, the fate of Section 9 application is that once the tribunal is appointed, the 9 application gets converted to a 17 automatically. So it is transferred to the tribunal, and then tribunal takes care of it. So
My
that's that.
my question is, here is a case where Section 9 has been invoked for the last 1 year. Even the
Yes.
court has rejected them. Now the matter is pending in the High Court. Still, he
Yes.
has not invoked the arbitration clause. So I am only saying whether there is a correlation between the invocation of the arbitration clause and Section 9. In case somebody doesn't invoke the arbitration clause and intends to pursue Section 9, then what would be the fate? Whether the proceedings under Section 9 would be vitiated or would allow to continue or sustainable? That is the question. Suppose if another party doesn't invoke the arbitration under Section 9, whosoever has approached under Section 9 doesn't invoke the arbitration and continues to pursue that matter, whether court can impose the condition, court can dismiss the petition due to non-invocation of the arbitration clause. This is my precise question.
Yes. So like I said, like I pointed, if you read Section 9(3), it is the mandate of the Act to invoke an arbitration within a period of 90 days from the date on which such an order is passed. And if it is not done, then obviously if I was to be a person who's being affected by a state order which has been issued under Section 9, I will definitely take this objection about the conduct of the other party, and I will say it was mandatory for him to invoke an arbitration within 90 days, which he did not. And thus the application must be dismissed.
But there is any case law on this?
To my mind, I don't know, because the statute is clear. I don't think we need a case law when the statute is clear about it.
I have searched a number of judgments. There is no such straight judgment on this issue. But here in this High Court also, in other courts also, they are not strictly pursuing this.
See, like I said,
this is only an obligatory. They are not considering it as a mandatory provision. They are not dismissing Section 9 basically only on the premise that this arbitration clause has not been invoked. That is the issue. That is what I am wondering. I found some judgment on Delhi High Court, but not directly dealing with this law and something like that, deliberating on.
No, but I'll tell you the problem. So, so far as in Delhi that I see, assuming that I am a party who is invoking arbitration, and if I am the claimant, I don't see any reason not appointing an arbitrator because my money is involved. If my money is involved, then I don't have any interest in not invoking arbitration for a year. Assuming what you are saying is correct, I mean, I have not seen such a case, because generally the claimant is very keen on invoking arbitration. The client is very persistent. That look, I want the arbitration to start, because the time period of arbitration is 1 year. And even though it begins when the arbitrator is appointed, but why would a party not want to pursue its case? And if the Section 9 is pending, the other scenario is why the court is not deciding the Section 9 within a year. Because if the arbitral tribunal is not in place, even then the High Court can decide the application. I don't see the reason for delay. On all these pretexts, I mean,
I'm talking about a case which was initially Section 9 was dismissed. The matter was then went to the High Court. Then in that case also, even during the pendency of the petition under Section 9 and appeal thereof, the arbitration clause has not been invoked. He is more interested in having the interim relief. This is what I am saying.
No, but against the order of the interim relief, you can always appeal. You can appeal that order under Section
9 was already filed. I am a respondent. I have already taken objection to the effect that the arbitration clause has not been invoked. But there is, since there is no strict state judgment to say that the petition is not maintainable under Section 9 in case the arbitration clause is not invoked under Section within 90 days. That is the issue.
No, but the Act is clear. So if you get an order, you can always challenge that order.
And if it says that in case it is not invoked within 90 days, then the petition under Section 9 deserves to be dismissed. That is not the mandate of the Act.
Yeah, you're right. But the mandate is that 90 days it should be invoked. If it is not invoked, then you show the conduct of the party.
We can only show the conduct, but that doesn't call for straightway dismissal of the petition. Mr. Tariq, another question is there.
Yes.
You discussed, you quoted the judgment of TRF Limited.
Yes.
TRF Limited judgment, in that judgment, the authority to appoint the arbitrator was with the managing director.
Yes.
And the Supreme Court held that since there is a prohibition under section Schedule 5 and 7, so our managing director could not act as a persona designata. So they say that once he doesn't have the power, then he will not have the power to appoint somebody else the arbitrator.
Yes.
But here in the case of NHI, it's a statutory arbitration. The Secretary Government of India appoints the arbitrator, though he is not an employee of the ministry or of NHI, but it certainly is a person outsider. But in that case also the TRF judgment will not apply, because of the reason TRF doesn't prohibit the appointment of a person outside the domain of the employment of a particular party. So I am saying that even in NHI, we are not even in a position to take the objection that the arbitrator has been appointed by the Government of India. Government of India is one of the party to the case because the land was acquired in the name of the Government of India. So I am only saying that TRF judgment is on the different dimension, but it doesn't bar the appointment of a person by the managing director. But in the TRF, the managing director itself was the named arbitrator.
If you have read the judgment, this issue was discussed in Delhi High Court in 3 matters. Firstly, the one being DK Gupta versus Renu Munjal. The second case was Bhayana Builders, and there was another judgment which Goel Constructions versus ICAI. In all 3 judgments, TRF was interpreted the way you are interpreting it. But Supreme Court in Perkins Eastman has clarified the intention of TRF. Perkins Eastman says very simply this. It has clarified TRF in simple words, and it has said the person interested in the subject matter of the dispute must not appoint an arbitrator. Now, this judgment, it depends from courts to courts how they interpret it. So far as Delhi High Court is concerned, any arbitration which is going on after 23rd October 2015, which has been initiated after that time, is going to be squarely covered by these judgments of Perkins Eastman. And if a person has been appointed as an arbitrator by an interested party, that objection can be taken at any stage by using Perkins Eastman. So that is what the Prodhutur cable. My request is that you read the Prodhutur cable judgment, and perhaps you may get more clarity on this point, but it depends at the end of the day on the courts how they want to interpret. Okay, I see that we are running against the clock. If we have any more questions, 12:40.
Only thereafter, the last question posed is by Deepak Lad, though I will not be taking the first question by him. But these are the last questions, and then we'll wind up. First, I go to Punita Sekho's query. Is an application under section 14(1)(a) moved by one of the parties to an arbitration agreement for termination of mandate of arbitration maintainable without simultaneously moving an application under section 11 for an appointment of the arbitrator?
Yes, excellent. So what practice I used to adopt? I used to file an application under section 14 read with section 11. So it was a hybrid. And then whenever an arbitrator was terminated, my 11 also gave the power to the court to appoint an arbitrator. I mean, I personally used to file applications like that. However, if you file an application under 14, my suggestion is you always file it with 14 and 15. So 14 and 15 go hand in hand, because if you read the language of 15 carefully, I don't have the Bare Act with me right now, but the clause clearly says in 15 that once the arbitrator is terminated, the court shall appoint a substitute arbitrator, which means that 14, 15, if you move, then the court has the power to appoint a new arbitrator, and it is mandatory on the arbitrator to on the court to appoint a substitute arbitrator, and no 11 is required then.
Puneet Sekho wants to unmute and ask the question herself. Puneet, you can come on the board. Puneet Sekho.
Hello. Yeah, Tariq, you've been very helpful. Sorry to trouble you again, but I just need to clarify. In my case, what has happened is that the other party, the party who's moved the application in section 14, says that in fact what they're doing is they're denying the arbitration clause altogether. So they've been smart enough to say that it's only an application under section 14 is being filed, but I'm just concerned about the fact that section 14 says that in case an arbitrator, it gives the power to the court to terminate the mandate and for substitution of that arbitrator. So by that clause, am I to understand that an arbitrator has to be appointed by the court and the court can just terminate the mandate? Would that be enough? I mean, I'm just looking for ways to.
No, absolutely right. Like I said, personally, what I do is, because I think in 15, if you see, there's a place that a substitute arbitrator shall be appointed.
15, Deepak Jindal or Sumit Jain has shared it. They have posted it.
Yeah, can you see a substitute arbitrator shall be appointed? Either, I think it's written somewhere. Yeah, it's 2, where the mandate of an arbitrator terminates A substitute arbitrator shall be appointed according to the rules. Can you see the clause 2, subsection 2
Yes,
of
yes,
15?
yes,
So
excellent. Yes.
the practice ordinarily is that 14 always moved with 15, always. So that you can always show to the court that, look, you are terminating the person under 14. You
Yes.
immediately appoint the substitute. But it's not something which will make any difference. If your prayer is to that effect, you have asked the court for appointment of a substitute arbitrator, then nothing stops the court. The courts have extraordinary powers. Merely not mentioning one provision would not make any difference. I don't think there is any need for a separate 11 to be moved. You may convince, because I don't think the other party will also make a fuss about it. And even if they do, the courts are diligent enough to see that there is no purpose of moving a separate 11, keeping in mind the object of the act. You need to point out to the court that the idea is to finish arbitration at the earliest and not waste time on 14, then 11, and then so on, so on, so on.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And no further questions will be posed. Whatever is on the screen, that are the last questions.
Can we have?
Aman has asked, Gujarat-based company financed a vehicle in Punjab on default of loan. Company invoked arbitration in Gujarat and obtained ex-party award. Then execution filed, which is transferred to Punjab. Can the defaulter in Punjab challenge the award in Punjab on any grounds?
Where is that question? Can I read it? It's a long.
By Man, I will just by Aman. Aman's question
Okay,
is.
I got it. Just 1 second. Gujarat company financed a vehicle in Punjab on default of loan. Company invoked arbitration in Gujarat and obtained ex parte award. Execution file, which is transferred to Punjab. Can the defaulter Punjab? And the date on which you received the signed copy. So
Tariq, you would have to repeat it because somehow you were also got muted.
No problem. I think it was required. So as long as, because the situation which you have given, I feel that at the stage of execution, it may not be possible to challenge the award because 120-day period is over, and it is impossible to challenge any award after 4 months, whether rightly or wrongly. But if, assuming, I'm taking your question one step further, if the question is in respect of period, if the award was given and you challenge it within 90 days or within 120 days, then you can of course challenge it if you can show. If there is no seat, then you'll have to show where the award was given, what is the cause of action. All those factors can be considered, and that is how you can perhaps create the jurisdiction of a particular court, and you can convince by merely relying on the jurisdiction clause in the agreement, or perhaps by showing that cause of action and everything happened in Punjab. But at the stage of execution, you cannot challenge the award because the period of 130 is over, 120 days is over as per 34.3. My request is please take question by Mr. Deepak Lad. He's my senior and I would like to answer his question. Can you please have the question of Mr. Deepak Lad?
Where is it?
He had asked a question. I read.
Probably there are too many questions barged out. The Deepak can come itself on the screen and ask it.
Can you unmute him if he's still there?
Yeah, everybody has got the power to unmute himself. It is only the self-restraint controlled by himself.
Okay.
The question of Tarun, the question of Deepak Lad is there.
Yeah. Is he on the board? Mr. Deepak is on the board.
Okay, can
Mr.
I read the
Tariq?
question?
Mr. Tariq, can you see it? Is Deepak on the board?
I can't see him, but I had seen his question.
On the chat box, the question is there.
Okay, I'll just see. Give me a minute.
Mr. PP Singh is able to read it. He can read the question. Mr. Singh?
As per Supreme Court judgment in HCC, automatic stay to arbitration award is not maintainable. Is this position applicable to pending court proceedings prior to 2015? Yes, that's an interesting question. So in BCCI judgment, which is prior to the HCC judgment, BCCI versus Kochi Cricket Association, the Supreme Court Justice Nariman in 2018 clarified that the automatic stay will have to go, and 36(2), which talks about no automatic stay being given on arbitral awards, will be applicable even to pending proceedings which had commenced prior to the 23rd October 2015. In a way, the section 36(2), which says that there will be no automatic stay, you will have to move a separate application, will be retrospective in nature. That's the long and short of it.
Tarun Elwadi asks, a contract provides that all dispute between the parties under the contract shall be resolved by arbitrator,
Yeah.
mutually appointed. And if the arbitrators are not able to appoint within 30 days, Delhi High Court shall appoint the arbitrator. The seat of arbitration is Delhi. The contract also provides that the subject to arbitration clause, courts at Mumbai shall also have the exclusive jurisdiction in all matters arising out of this agreement. Can either party challenge the arbitration proceedings and/or appointment of arbitrator by Delhi High Court and Mumbai Court, or directly file the petition in the courts at Mumbai?
Like I had told you, there was a recent judgment of Supreme Court, which has been shared by Kushika Mankatsu by Justice Bhanumati, which is a 5th March 2020 judgment. That is the recent position of law. Section 11 for appointment of arbitrator was filed in Delhi. The seat was Hong Kong. The Supreme Court said, no, Delhi will not be maintainable. You will have to go where the seat is. So as long as seat is defined, you can't look anywhere else. That's the law and long and short of the law.
Now the last question is from Niharika. Can an arbitration clause grant jurisdiction to a court which otherwise doesn't have a jurisdiction? Example, seat is defined at Chandigarh. However, neither the parties nor the cause of action has arisen at Chandigarh.
Yes, that can happen.
Okay, I think all questions are over. I will ask Mr. PP Singh to give a vote of thanks on behalf of everybody after having an enriching discussions, though it was more like a one-sided affair. One thing is truly learned, that even after 5 years experience, one can have your 5 years professional experience is much better than ours, even though we are after 25 years, 30 years and across the line. Probably Mr. PP Singh would share this, would agree upon this idea. Mr. Singh, can you give a vote of thanks? Hello, Mr. Singh has probably left. Deepak Jindal. Deepak, can you hear me? Mr. PP Singh is there, back. Mr. Singh, kindly give the vote of thanks. Hello, Mr. Singh. He's unmuted. I don't know. Singh Saab. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hello. So Singh Saab da sunai nahi de raha. Can I ask Riddhi or Siddhi, you can give a vote of thanks.
Hello.
Yeah, Riddhi.
Can you hear me, sir? Thank you, Arik sir, for the enriching experience. We got to learn the basic concepts, procedure of how to conduct an arbitration, and as well as the recent judgment that shed light upon the loopholes that were left in the Arbitration Act of 1996 and post the amendment also, sir. And thank you. And on behalf of all of us, a very thank you for joining us and giving such an enriching experience. We've just started our practice, so at the start of a practice, this exposure will help us a lot, sir.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Tariq, though there has been a formal vote of thanks, I will just like to add 3 words. Could you come on the screen? I'm not able to see you.
I am on the screen, sir.
Just hold on. Mr.
Sayyid has asked me a question. How can I keep an eye on your
He's
neck?
very much on the screen.
Yeah, I'm on the screen. You'll have to click on my name, perhaps.
Mr. Khan is on the screen.
Mr. Yeah, I can ask the question now. Where is Tariq's question?
I think there's one question. You can
Sayyid.
check. Sayyid, you can.
Please let us know how can we keep an eye on your upcoming session.
Yeah, I mean, you can stay in touch. I think Sayyid is on my LinkedIn. You have access to my LinkedIn profile. If you don't, you can add me there. I'll keep you posted.
Okay. 2 or 3 lines from my side. There couldn't be a better insight by having a bird eye view in a short way. Otherwise, as I usually speak in all sessions, books are running into 1,000 pages, 500 pages. We are not able to assimilate all the facts in one go. You have been able to show that why your articles in Bar and Bench, Live Law, as you have said that you have to read. I just read article day before yesterday. He said how to write better. It said first start writing. Then he said how to speak better. Then he said first start writing. And second, the sum and substance brought off on the entire act in one way is very good. And as Riddhi and Siddhi said that they're the youngsters, they have joined only in this year. I am reminded that the seeds have been planted today of the Arbitration Act in many of the minds today. And you have also enriched many of the people. So I won't say by the next session it will be, but with the graduated time, you will find that the seeds grown by you have become saplings, and saplings gradually graduating into the trees. And fruits, you can find it at a subsequent point of time. Tarek, it was a wonderful experience by you. It was nice catching up. And everybody who was on the board, it's a wonderful experience. Keep in touch. You can also see the upcoming events of our group on Legal Eye CLC. You can like the page. You will be updated on this. Or you can join the WhatsApp group. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone. It was my
Thank
pleasure.
you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.